The highway stretched before Sarah Linton like an endless ribbon of asphalt, glistening faintly under the soft yellow glow of the streetlights. It had rained earlier in the evening, leaving the road slick and the air thick with that fresh, earthy smell of wet pavement. The rain had tapered off just enough to create a deceptive sheen on the freeway, one that a seasoned driver might overlook. Sarah wasn't a seasoned driver. At 29 years old, she had always been cautious behind the wheel, the kind of person who double-checked her mirrors and came to full stops even when the intersection was deserted. Her friends teased her for being overly careful, but Sarah didn't mind. Driving wasn't something she took lightly, especially on nights like this, when visibility was low and the rush hour traffic was unforgiving. She glanced at the dashboard clock, 8:47 p.m. Another long day at work, another late commute home. The familiar strain of fatigue tugged at her eyes, but she fought it off. The soft hum of her car's engine and the gentle rhythm of a lo-fi playlist playing through the speakers helped her focus. Traffic moved at a steady pace, the stream of cars ahead creating a dance of red taillights. Sarah kept a comfortable distance from the vehicle in front of her, a habit ingrained by her father, who had taught her to always expect the unexpected on the road. But even her father's sage advice couldn't have prepared her for what happened next. It started subtly, like a whisper of unease. As Sarah approached a slight curve in the road, her tires skimmed over a patch of water she hadn't seen until it was too late. The sensation was immediate, of a sudden, heart-stopping loss of traction. Her stomach dropped as the car began to skid. Instinct took over. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white, and tried to correct the car's direction. But the slippery pavement had other plans. The sedan fishtailed wildly, swinging left, then right, as if caught in an invisible tug-of-war. "No, no, no!" Sarah gasped, her voice trembling as she fought to regain control. She barely had time to react before the car spun into a full 360-degree turn. The world outside her windows became a blur of lights. White, red, and yellow streaks swirling around her in dizzying chaos. Her tires screeched against the wet asphalt, a sound that cut through the night like a scream. The other drivers on the freeway reacted just as chaotically. Horns blared, headlights flashed, and cars swerved to avoid her spinning vehicle. Sarah caught glimpses of their panicked faces as they passed her, their expressions frozen in shock and fear. The sound of her own heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out everything else. She was no longer thinking. She was simply reacting, her hands and feet moving on autopilot. The steering wheel seemed unresponsive, and the brakes did little to slow the spin. For a brief moment, the only thought in her mind was, "This is how it ends." Then, something extraordinary happened. Just as the car seemed destined to careen out of control, a strange sense of calm washed over Sarah. It was as though time had slowed, and with it, the chaos around her. The panic in her chest subsided, replaced by an inexplicable certainty that everything was going to be okay. Her hands, which had been trembling moments ago, steadied themselves on the wheel. The car, still spinning, began to straighten out as if guided by an unseen force. It didn't make sense. She hadn't done anything different, hadn't figured out the mechanics of what was happening. It was as though something or someone had taken control. Sarah's gaze darted to her rearview mirror, then to her side mirrors. Cars zipped past her, narrowly missing her by inches. Yet somehow, no one collided with her. She felt the tires grip the road again, their screeching replaced by a smooth, deliberate motion. Her car aligned itself perfectly in the center of her lane, facing forward once more. The headlights illuminated the path ahead, a stretch of open road, unmarred by the chaos she had just escaped. Sarah's breathing came in shallow gasps. Her hands were still glued to the steering wheel, her palms damp with sweat. It took her a moment to realize that she was moving again, driving straight as if nothing had happened. She couldn't believe it. The highway was still bustling with traffic, the flow uninterrupted by her near catastrophe. Glancing in her mirrors, she saw no signs of an accident, no flashing emergency lights or wreckage. It was as if the world had simply moved on, oblivious to the miracle that had just occurred. A miracle. The word echoed in her mind, bringing with it a flood of emotions. Relief, gratitude, disbelief. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision. She blinked them away, her focus returning to the road ahead. "How?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. She reached out and turned off the music, needing silence to process what had just happened. Her mind replayed the event over and over again, searching for an explanation. The patch of water, the spin, the sudden intervention, it didn't add up. Sarah wasn't particularly religious, but she had grown up in a household where faith was a quiet, constant presence. Her mother used to tell her stories about guardian angels, invisible protectors who watched over people in times of need. As a child, Sarah had loved those stories, but she had long since dismissed them as comforting fairy tales. Now, though, she wasn't so sure. Sarah drove the next few miles in a daze, her hands still trembling slightly on the wheel. When she finally reached an exit, she pulled off the highway and into a gas station parking lot. Turning off the engine, she sat in silence, her mind still racing. She thought about calling someone, her best friend, her mom, but what would she even say? That she had been saved by some invisible force? It sounded absurd, even to her. Instead, she took a deep breath and closed her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, unsure who or what she was addressing. Her pulse began to slow, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind a profound sense of gratitude. Whatever had happened on that highway, it had changed something within her. For the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a glimmer of faith. Not in a specific deity or dogma, but in the idea that there was more to the world than she could see or understand. She didn't have the answers, but she had something better, a second chance. And she wasn't going to waste it. Sarah sat on the side of the highway for what felt like an eternity. Cars rushed past her, the whoosh of tires and hum of engines providing a strange rhythm to her scattered thoughts. She stared blankly at her hands on the steering wheel, her knuckles still white from gripping it so tightly moments ago. Her breathing was shallow, her chest tight, but her mind kept replaying the same question. What just happened? The memory of the spin was vivid. She could still feel the sensation of her car losing control, the pull of inertia as it twisted and turned. But what stuck with her more than the chaos was the calm that had come over her in the midst of it. It was as if someone had pressed pause on her panic, replacing it with a sense of certainty and safety she couldn't explain. After several minutes, Sarah forced herself to start the car again. The engine rumbled to life, steady and familiar, grounding her in the present. She pulled back onto the highway, driving cautiously now, her hands gripping the wheel as though it were a lifeline. As she merged into the flow of traffic, her eyes darted to every detail around her. The headlights of oncoming cars, the subtle movements of vehicles in neighboring lanes, the shimmer of moisture on the road. Everything seemed sharper, more vivid. Her awareness of her surroundings was heightened, as if her body had entered a state of hypervigilance. Yet, beneath the tension, there was a lingering sense of awe. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she hadn't been alone in that moment of crisis. Something had guided her car back to safety. But what? The next morning, Sarah woke early, unable to sleep much after the previous night's ordeal. Her apartment felt strangely small and quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound breaking the stillness. She brewed a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the first rays of sunlight stretch across the city skyline. The event replayed in her mind again, but this time, she let herself sit with the questions that had been nagging her. Had it been pure chance? She had heard stories about accidents where people walked away unscathed due to nothing more than luck. But this didn't feel like luck. Luck would have been avoiding the spin altogether, or narrowly missing a collision. What she had experienced felt intentional, as though someone or something had intervened. Her thoughts drifted to the idea of guardian angels. It wasn't something she had thought about in years. As a child, her mother had often said prayers with her before bed, asking for angels to watch over her. Sarah used to imagine them as glowing figures with soft wings and warm smiles, hovering protectively around her bed. The idea had comforted her then, but as she grew older, she had dismissed such notions as fanciful stories meant to soothe children's fears. Now, though, she wasn't so sure. Later that afternoon, Sarah found herself at the library. She had no real plan, just a vague urge to learn more about the things that had crossed her mind since the incident. She wandered through the aisles, her fingers grazing the spines of books until she reached the spirituality section. There, she found volumes on angels, divine intervention, and miracles. One title caught her eye, Touched by Grace, Stories of Everyday Miracles. She pulled it from the shelf and settled into a nearby chair, flipping through its pages. The stories were incredible. Accounts of people who had been saved from certain death, who had experienced inexplicable events that they could only attribute to divine intervention. One story, in particular, resonated with her. It was about a woman who had fallen asleep at the wheel late at night. Her car had drifted toward the edge of a cliff, and just as it seemed she would plummet to her death, she felt an unseen force jerk the wheel back onto the road. The woman described a feeling of warmth and calm, as if someone had been sitting beside her, guiding her to safety. Sarah's breath caught as she read the words. The experience mirrored her own so closely that she felt a chill run down her spine. Could it really be possible that she had been touched by something beyond her understanding? That evening, Sarah decided to talk to someone about what had happened. She called her best friend, Mia, who answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" "You sound weird," Mia said, her tone immediately concerned. "I'm fine. At least, I think I am," Sarah replied, curling up on her couch with a throw blanket. Just something happened last night. I need to tell you about it." She recounted the entire event, from the moment she hit the slippery patch to the way the car seemed to correct itself. She explained the strange calm that had come over her and the way the car had aligned perfectly back into the lane, as though guided by invisible hands. When she finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. "That's wow," Mia finally said. "Are you sure you weren't just super lucky?" "I don't think it was luck," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "It didn't feel like that. It felt deliberate, like someone was helping me." "You mean like an angel?" Mia asked, her tone a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Maybe. I don't know. I've been thinking about it all day, and I can't come up with another explanation." "Well, if it was an angel, they did a pretty good job," Mia said with a small laugh. "Seriously, though, I'm glad you're okay." "That sounds terrifying." "It was," Sarah admitted. "But it was also amazing in a way. Like I've been given a second chance." After hanging up with Mia, Sarah sat in silence for a while, her thoughts swirling. She felt a strange mix of emotions, gratitude, awe, confusion. The more she thought about it, the more convinced she became that the event hadn't been random. That night, as she lay in bed, she whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. It felt strange, almost foreign, to pray after so many years of not doing so. But it also felt right. "Whoever or whatever you are," she murmured, her voice soft in the darkness. "Thank you. I don't know why you saved me, but I'm grateful." As she drifted off to sleep, she felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in years. It was as if the unseen hand that had guided her car had also touched her heart, reminding her that she wasn't alone. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing for certain. Something extraordinary had happened on that highway, and she would carry the memory of it with her for the rest of her life. The days following the highway incident were anything but ordinary for Sarah. She moved through her routine as if in a haze, replaying the events over and over in her mind. The sensation of the car spinning, the inexplicable calm that had overtaken her, and the almost magical way her vehicle aligned back into its lane. They felt more vivid than the present moment. It was as if time itself had been marked by the event. Everything before it felt distant, and everything after seemed colored by its impact. On the third day after the incident, Sarah decided she couldn't ignore her curiosity any longer. She had to revisit the scene. It was late afternoon when she found herself back on the stretch of highway where it had all unfolded. The weather was clear, the road dry, a stark contrast to the damp, slippery night she remembered so vividly. Traffic was light, and as she slowed her car near the area where she had lost control, she felt her pulse quicken. The spot was unremarkable, just another section of freeway with no distinct markers or signs of danger. No skid marks remained on the asphalt to hint at the chaos that had occurred. If she hadn't known better, she might have doubted that anything had happened at all. Sarah pulled over onto the shoulder and turned off her car. She stepped out and stood by the guardrail, watching the steady stream of vehicles pass by. The sound of rushing tires filled the air, a backdrop to her racing thoughts. Why here? Why me? She closed her eyes and tried to recapture the feeling she'd had that night. The moment when fear gave way to serenity, when it felt as if an invisible hand had taken control. The memory was so vivid it was almost tangible. "Who are you?" she whispered aloud, feeling a little silly for speaking to the open air. "What happened to me?" As she stood there, a breeze swept across the highway, ruffling her hair and sending a shiver down her spine. The sensation was faint but oddly familiar, like the comforting touch of a hand on her shoulder. Sarah opened her eyes and looked around, half expecting to see someone standing nearby. But she was alone. Her gaze drifted upward toward the sky. The sun was setting, casting the horizon in hues of orange and gold. For a moment, she felt a strange connection to something beyond herself, something vast and incomprehensible. A single thought entered her mind, unbidden: "You're not alone." The words brought tears to her eyes, though she couldn't explain why. She wiped them away quickly, feeling self-conscious despite the fact that no one was there to see. On her way home, Sarah stopped at a small cafe she hadn't visited in years. It was the kind of place she used to frequent in her college days, back when she had time to linger over coffee and lose herself in a book. The scent of freshly brewed espresso greeted her as she walked in, and she felt a pang of nostalgia. She ordered a cappuccino and found a seat by the window. As she sipped her drink, she pulled out her notebook, a habit she had picked up in her younger years but had neglected in recent times. Flipping to a blank page, she began to write. "Something happened to me on the highway," she started. The words flowed easily, as though they had been waiting to spill out. She described the spin, the fear, the intervention, and the way the car had straightened itself. She wrote about the calm that had enveloped her and the sense of an unseen presence guiding her to safety. When she finished, she sat back and reread what she had written. Seeing the words on the page made the experience feel more real, more concrete. As she stared at the notebook, a memory from her childhood surfaced. She was 8 years old, sitting on the floor of her grandmother's living room, flipping through a book of angel illustrations. Her grandmother had been a devout woman, often speaking of the divine in everyday life. "Angels are everywhere," her grandmother had said, smiling down at her. "They don't always have wings or halos, but they're always watching over us. Sometimes they step in when we need them most." At the time, Sarah had been fascinated by the idea. She had imagined angels as glowing, ethereal beings who swooped in to save people from danger. But as she grew older, she dismissed the concept as a comforting story meant for children. Now, though, she wasn't so sure. Could it really have been an angel? She wondered. The next day, Sarah decided to do something she hadn't done in years. She went to church. It wasn't a Sunday, so the sanctuary was nearly empty when she arrived. The air was cool and still, the only sound the faint creak of the wooden pews as she took a seat near the back. She sat in silence for a while, her gaze fixed on the stained glass windows that depicted scenes of angels and saints. The colors were vibrant, casting patterns of light on the floor as the sun streamed through. "I don't know what I'm looking for," she admitted aloud, her voice barely above a whisper. but I feel like I owe someone thanks. As the words left her lips, she felt a sense of relief, as though a weight had been lifted from her chest. Later that week, Sarah's curiosity led her to reach out to others who had experienced similar phenomena. She found online forums and social media groups dedicated to stories of divine intervention and miracles. She read accounts from people all over the world, stories of car crashes avoided, illnesses healed, and lives saved under impossible circumstances. Many of them described the same sense of calm and certainty that Sarah had felt during her spin. One story in particular caught her attention. It was from a man who had narrowly avoided a plane crash. He described feeling a presence beside him in his seat, even though he was traveling alone. It felt like someone was holding my hand, he had written. I didn't see anyone, but I knew I wasn't alone. Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she read the words. She couldn't explain it, but she felt connected to these people, as if their experiences validated her own. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life began to change in subtle but meaningful ways. She started paying closer attention to the world around her, the kindness of strangers, the beauty of nature, the small coincidences that felt like whispers from the universe. She began volunteering at a local community center, something she had always wanted to do but had never found the time for. Helping others gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling that she was part of something bigger than herself. The memory of the highway incident remained with her, not as a source of fear, but as a reminder of the fragility and preciousness of life. For Sarah, the miracle wasn't just about surviving the spin. It was about what came after. It was about the way it opened her eyes to the possibility of grace, the idea that she wasn't navigating life alone. And for the first time in years, she felt truly alive. Days turned into weeks, and though Sarah's life resumed its outward normalcy, inwardly she felt transformed. The highway incident had awakened something in her, a curiosity, a sense of wonder, and a deep yearning to understand the invisible force that had seemingly intervened to save her life. It wasn't just the memory of the spinning car that lingered. It was the inexplicable calm that had overtaken her, the whisper of presence that felt both protective and profoundly intimate. Something or someone had been there with her. She was sure of it. But what? And why? One sunny afternoon, Sarah decided to take a walk through the park near her apartment. She hadn't been there in months, too caught up in the grind of work and daily obligations to carve out time for something as simple as a stroll. But today, she felt drawn to the quiet sanctuary of the trees and the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. The park was serene, a haven from the city's relentless noise. Families picnicked on the grass. Joggers passed by with rhythmic footfalls, and children's laughter floated through the air like a melody. Sarah found a bench near a small pond and sat down, letting the tranquility seep into her. Closing her eyes, she tilted her face toward the sun and inhaled deeply, the scent of fresh grass and blooming flowers filling her senses. She felt the breeze again, a light, gentle caress that seemed almost deliberate, as if it carried a message. You're not alone. The thought came to her suddenly, unbidden yet unmistakably clear. Her eyes snapped open, and she looked around, half expecting to see someone nearby. But no one was there. Okay, she murmured, feeling a little foolish for speaking out loud. If this is a sign, I'm listening. Just give me something more. That evening, Sarah sat on her couch with a steaming mug of chamomile tea, scrolling through her phone. She had been researching stories about guardian angels and divine interventions ever since the incident, and tonight was no different. One article caught her eye. Messages from beyond. How angels communicate. Intrigued, she clicked on it. The article described various ways people believed angels or spiritual guides might reach out to them. Through subtle signs, vivid dreams, or an unshakable feeling of comfort during moments of crisis. One section mentioned feathers appearing in unexpected places, a common symbol of angelic presence. Sarah smiled skeptically, but the idea stuck with her. She glanced around her apartment, her gaze lingering on the bookshelves, the soft glow of the floor lamp, the potted plants by the window. Everything looked ordinary. But was it? She thought about the breeze in the park, the sense of connection she had felt. Was it possible that her unseen helper was still with her, still trying to communicate? The next morning, as Sarah was leaving her apartment for work, she paused in the doorway. Something white and delicate caught her eye, resting on the welcome mat. It was a feather. She crouched down, picking it up carefully between her fingers. It was small and pristine, its edges soft and unblemished. A shiver ran through her. It could have been coincidence, of course, a stray feather blown by the wind, but something about it felt purposeful, as though it had been placed there just for her. Sarah tucked the feather into her pocket, a strange sense of reassurance settling over her. At work, Sarah found it difficult to focus. Her mind kept wandering to the feather, to the breeze in the park, to the presence she had felt on the highway. She began to wonder if she should talk to someone about her experiences, someone who might help her make sense of it all. During her lunch break, she called her mother. "Mom, can I ask you something?" Sarah began hesitantly, unsure how to broach the subject. "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Do you remember those stories you used to tell me about angels? The ones who watch over us?" Her mother chuckled softly. "Ido, why do you ask?" Sarah hesitated, then told her mother everything. The spin on the highway, the sense of calm, the feather on her welcome mat. When she finished, there was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sarah," her mother said gently, "I've always believed that angels are real. I think they show themselves in ways that are subtle, but undeniable if you're paying attention. It sounds to me like you're being given a gift, a reminder that you're protected." Her mother's words sent a wave of warmth through her. "You really think so?" "I do," her mother said firmly. "And I think you should trust what you're feeling. Sometimes we don't need all the answers to know that something beautiful has happened." That evening, Sarah decided to document her experiences more thoroughly. She opened her notebook and began writing, this time with the intention of creating a timeline. She started with the highway incident, describing every detail she could remember. Then she wrote about the feather, the breeze in the park, and her conversation with her mother. As she wrote, she began to notice a pattern. Each event, no matter how small, seemed to carry the same underlying message: you're not alone. The realization brought tears to her eyes. She had spent so much of her life feeling isolated, disconnected from the world around her. But now, she felt something shift within her, a sense of belonging, of being part of something greater. Over the next few weeks, Sarah began to notice more signs. She found another feather on her car windshield after work one evening. And once, while walking through a bookstore, a stranger handed her a book about finding peace in times of uncertainty. "It just seemed like you might like this," the woman had said with a smile, before disappearing into the crowd. Each sign, no matter how subtle, felt like a nudge, a gentle reminder that she was being guided. One night, as Sarah sat on her balcony, gazing at the stars, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The experience on the highway had shaken her to her core, but it had also awakened her to a world she had never truly considered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice carried away by the wind. "I don't know who you are, but thank you for saving me. Thank you for reminding me that I'm not alone." The breeze picked up, warm and soft, brushing against her skin like an embrace. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of peace, a quiet assurance that she was exactly where she was meant to be. And in that moment, she knew she would carry the memory of the unseen hand that had saved her for the rest of her life. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life began to transform in subtle but meaningful ways. The experience on the highway, coupled with the series of signs that followed, had stirred something deep within her, a curiosity about the unseen forces of life and a longing to connect with something greater than herself. At first, she didn't know what to do with these feelings. She was hesitant to share them with most people, fearing they might dismiss her experiences as mere coincidence or, worse, think she was imagining things. But the more Sarah reflected on the series of events, the less she could believe they were random. One Saturday morning, Sarah decided to visit a local spiritual center she had passed many times but had never entered. It wasn't a traditional church, but rather a small community space offering workshops and discussions on topics like mindfulness, meditation, and spirituality. She arrived feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. The building was simple, with a welcoming sign that read, "Open hearts, open minds." Stepping inside, Sarah was greeted by a warm smile from the receptionist, an older woman with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. "Welcome," the woman said. "Is this your first time here?" "Yes," Sarah replied, feeling a bit out of her depth. "I'm not really sure what I'm looking for." "That's perfectly okay," the woman said. "Sometimes the best journeys start with questions." The woman handed Sarah a pamphlet outlining the day's events. One session caught her eye, exploring the presence of angels, a group discussion. Her heart skipped a beat. It felt too perfect to be a coincidence. The session was held in a small room, filled with soft chairs arranged in a circle. A dozen people of various ages and backgrounds were already seated when Sarah arrived, each looking equally curious and introspective. The facilitator, a man named Daniel, welcomed everyone with a calm, soothing voice. He introduced the topic by sharing his own story, a harrowing experience in which he had narrowly avoided a serious accident, guided, he believed, by an unseen presence. As Daniel spoke, Sarah felt a pang of recognition. His description of the calm that overtook him during the crisis mirrored her own experience on the highway. She leaned forward, hanging on his every word. "We often dismiss these moments as luck or coincidence," Daniel said. "But what if there's something more? What if they're messages? Reminders that we're not navigating life alone?" His words resonated deeply with Sarah. She felt a lump rise in her throat, but this time, it wasn't fear or sadness. It was something closer to relief, a sense of validation that she wasn't alone in what she had experienced. When the time came for participants to share their own stories, Sarah hesitated. She wasn't sure if she was ready to open up, especially in front of strangers. But as she listened to others speak, each story unique, yet carrying the same undercurrent of awe and gratitude, she found herself compelled to contribute. When her turn came, she took a deep breath and began. "I don't know if I've ever believed in angels," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But something happened to me a few weeks ago that I can't explain." She recounted the incident on the highway, describing the spin, the calm that overtook her, and the way the car seemed to correct itself. As she spoke, the room grew quiet, the other participants listening intently. When she finished, Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for sharing that," he said. "It's a beautiful example of how the unseen can manifest in our lives." "Do you feel different since it happened?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "I feel more aware, I guess. Like I'm noticing things I wouldn't have before." Daniel smiled. "That awareness is a gift. Often, experiences like yours serve as a wake-up call, a way of reminding us to pay attention to the world around us and within us." After the session, several people approached Sarah to thank her for sharing her story. One woman, an artist named Claire, handed Sarah a small, hand-painted card with an image of an angel on it. "I made these for moments like this," Claire said, "to remind people that they're not alone." Sarah accepted the card with gratitude, touched by the gesture. That evening, Sarah sat on her balcony, the card resting on the table beside her. She gazed at the stars, feeling a deep sense of connection to something larger than herself. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to pray, not out of obligation or desperation, but out of a genuine desire to express her gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, her words carried away by the cool night breeze. "I don't know what's guiding me, but I'm grateful. And I'm listening." The breeze seemed to respond, brushing gently against her cheek like a whisper of reassurance. In the days that followed, Sarah began to notice more coincidences. A random conversation with a stranger led her to discover a new volunteering opportunity at a local shelter. A book she stumbled upon in a thrift store contained passages that spoke directly to her current feelings and questions. Each occurrence felt like a small, deliberate nudge, a reminder that she was being guided. One afternoon, while organizing her desk, Sarah came across a journal she had kept years ago. Flipping through its pages, she was struck by how different she had been back then, more optimistic, more open to life's possibilities. Somewhere along the way, she had lost that part of herself, buried it beneath the demands of adulthood and the weight of past disappointments. But now, she felt it stirring again. Sarah began journaling regularly, not just about her experiences, but also about her thoughts and feelings. She wrote about her hopes, her fears, and the ways she wanted to grow. Writing became a form of therapy, a way of connecting with herself and the unseen presence she now believed was guiding her. One evening, while journaling, Sarah had a revelation. The highway incident hadn't just been about survival. It had been a catalyst, a turning point that had set her on a new path. It wasn't just about the miracle of the car aligning itself. It was about the miracle of rediscovering her own inner strength, her capacity for faith, and her connection to the world around her. She realized that the presence she had felt wasn't just external. It was within her as well. It was the part of her that had remained calm in the face of chaos, the part that had trusted in something greater. And in that realization, Sarah found peace. From that day forward, Sarah approached life with a renewed sense of purpose. She continued to volunteer, to seek out moments of connection and meaning, and to trust in the guidance she felt around her. The experience on the highway had changed her, not just in how she viewed the world, but in how she viewed herself. She no longer felt alone, no longer doubted her place in the grand, mysterious tapestry of life. And as she moved forward, she carried the quiet certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Sarah's life had been a whirlwind of change since that night on the highway. Every morning, she woke with a sense of gratitude that had been absent for years, a quiet acknowledgement that she was alive for a reason, though the full scope of that reason still eluded her. Yet, the nudges and signs continued, small but undeniable reminders that her path had shifted, that she was being guided towards something greater. One crisp fall morning, Sarah woke to the sound of birds chirping outside her window. She stretched, feeling unusually refreshed, and decided to take a walk to clear her mind. The park had become her sanctuary, a place where she could think, reflect, and connect with the presence she had come to trust. The trees were a riot of color, their leaves ablaze in shades of red, orange, and gold. As Sarah walked along the winding paths, she noticed a young boy sitting on a bench with a sketchpad. He was no older than 10, his brow furrowed in concentration as he worked on a drawing. Curious, Sarah stopped a few feet away and glanced over his shoulder. The page was filled with swirling lines that formed what looked like a pair of wings. Huge, graceful, and luminous. "That's beautiful," Sarah said softly, not wanting to startle him. The boy looked up, his eyes bright. "Thanks," he said, smiling shyly. "It's an angel." Sarah felt a twinge of recognition. "An angel? What made you draw that?" The boy shrugged. "I just like thinking about them. My mom says they're always watching over us." Sarah sat down on the bench, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the conversation. "I think your mom might be right," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "Do you think angels are real?" The boy nodded earnestly. "Definitely. They're the ones who help us when we're scared or in trouble. Like when I got lost at the fair last summer. This nice man helped me find my mom, but then we couldn't find him afterward. My mom said he was probably an angel." Sarah smiled, her chest tightening. "That's a wonderful story. I think you're onto something." As they talked, Sarah realized how much she had missed the simplicity of childhood faith. The ability to believe in something without needing proof, to trust in the unseen without hesitation. The boy's words stayed with her long after their conversation ended. The next few weeks brought even more opportunities for reflection. Sarah continued volunteering at the local shelter, where she found a deep sense of fulfillment in helping others. One evening, as she served dinner to a long line of guests, she struck up a conversation with an older woman named Evelyn, who had been coming to the shelter for months. Evelyn's face was lined with years of hardship, but her eyes sparkled with a resilience that Sarah admired. As they talked, Evelyn shared pieces of her story: how she had lost her home after a series of medical bills piled up, how she had spent years trying to rebuild her life, and how she still managed to find hope in the smallest things. "You know what keeps me going?" Evelyn said, her voice steady but warm. "It's knowing that there's always someone looking out for me. Even when I felt completely alone, I've always believed there's a reason I'm still here." Sarah's breath caught. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," she said, "about why we're here and how we get through the hard times." Evelyn smiled knowingly. "Maybe you've had your own reason to wonder about those things." Sarah hesitated, then shared a brief version of her experience on the highway. Evelyn listened intently, nodding as Sarah described the sense of calm that had enveloped her, the feeling of being guided. "That's not just a coincidence," Evelyn said firmly. "That's grace. You've been given a second chance, and now it's up to you to decide what to do with it." That night, Sarah lay in bed, unable to sleep. Evelyn's words echoed in her mind, and she felt a growing certainty that she needed to do more. Surviving the highway incident hadn't just been a random stroke of luck. It had been a call to action, a chance to make her life meaningful in ways she hadn't yet imagined. The next morning, she opened her journal and began writing a list of things she wanted to do, ways she could give back, connect with others, and honor the second chance she'd been given. At the top of the list was something that had been quietly forming in her mind for weeks: starting a support group for people who had experienced similar moments of unexplained grace or intervention. Over the following months, Sarah worked tirelessly to bring her idea to life. She reached out to community centers, libraries, and spiritual organizations, eventually finding a space willing to host the group. She named it Touched by Grace, a nod to the feeling that had transformed her own life. The first meeting was small, just Sarah and 3 other people. But as they shared their stories, Sarah felt a powerful sense of connection. Each person's experience was unique, yet there was a common thread of awe and gratitude that united them. One man, a firefighter named Tom, described how he had survived a collapsing building during a rescue mission. He spoke of a sudden, inexplicable burst of strength that allowed him to carry an injured woman to safety, even though he had been moments away from giving up. A young mother named Rachel shared how she had been driving on a dark country road when she swerved to avoid a deer and nearly went off a steep embankment. Like Sarah, she had felt an invisible hand guiding her car back onto the road. As the group grew, so did the sense of purpose that had taken root in Sarah's heart. She realized that her experience wasn't just about her. It was part of something much larger, a shared tapestry of miracles and grace that connected people across time and place. One evening, after a particularly moving meeting, Sarah stayed behind to clean up the space. As she folded chairs and stacked them against the wall, she noticed a small feather resting on the floor near the door. It was white and delicate, almost identical to the one she had found weeks earlier. She picked it up, holding it gently between her fingers. A smile spread across her face as she felt the now familiar warmth of reassurance wash over her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with conviction. For everything. Sarah's journey had come full circle, yet it felt like only the beginning. The experience on the highway had changed her life in ways she couldn't have imagined, leading her to rediscover her faith, her purpose, and her connection to the world around her. She no longer questioned whether she was alone. She knew, deep in her soul, that she was surrounded by grace, by the unseen hand that had guided her that fateful night, by the people who had shared their stories with her, and by the quiet moments of beauty and connection that continued to unfold in her life. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, the feather tucked safely in her pocket, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace, knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be.